Audio Jungle.
Into next. Now, what are the benefits of Q&A 11? Let's start from the technology, because as we've already discussed, technologically Q&A 11 is quite different to Q&A 10. First thing to remember, it's written in .NET. Visual Basic's completely gone unless you're writing macros. No Visual Basic in the design of it or writing of it at all. It's a truly 64-bit application, so that means you can use it with 64-bit Excel. It's also Office 365 compatible. Q&A 10 has a problem with Office 365 in that Info are only supporting it up to the equivalent of Excel 2016, which is a problem on Office 365 because obviously subscription models push out updates that take you beyond that. So if you're using Office 365, you should seriously take a look at Q&A 11. It's a true client-server application. This is a fundamental shift for Q&A. So previously, Q&A 10 and all previous versions were installed only on the client or the user's PC. Okay, so if you had 20 users, 20 installs. Q&A 11 is fundamentally different in that Q&A is installed on the server, and the only thing that gets installed on the client or user's PC is the Excel add-in. So that's a real big shift. What that means is processing all takes place on the server and not on the client PC. It also means that the access to the SQL database or the Sun Systems data also happens on the server and not on the client PC, and that has some implications for some positive ones for Q&A 11. It means that Q&A now has a small client footprint. Okay, so whereas previously you had the whole application there, you just have the add-in. It also means that software updates, and Q&A 11 now has a patch program, so every time there are, let's say, some bug fixes or some enhancements, you don't necessarily have to install a new version. So all patches are applied to the server. The client update is very small, and what happens is when you patch the server, if the add-in needs to be updated, it's notified when you log into the application from the user's PC, and they just press a button and download the later add-in. It's as simple as that. So it's much more simple to administer for IT departments. Data links that connect Q&A to Sun Systems or other applications are held on the server. So that means they're only updated on the server. So whereas previously, let's say you needed to update a data link in a scenario where you've got 50 users, you would have to go to each of the 50 users and update the data link or manage that process separately, but each of the 50 would need to be updated. Now there's just one update for the data link, so that's a big saving. The other thing we have is we have a web-based user admin tool. Now what this means is because Q&A 11 is installed on the server, so is all of the user administration. So things like password changes, clearing users, adding new users, deleting them. So obviously that is not necessarily practical to give users access to the server in order to be able to do that. So what Info have done is they've written a web tool that you access via a browser that allows you to do some basic user administration. So for example, you can change passwords, you can change your own password, you can add a new user and assign them to an existing profile, you can assign a user to a different profile, you can delete them. So just some basic functionality, and we'll take a look at that. And the other big one is that because all of the connections between the SQL database and Q&A take place on the server, which generally speaking users don't have access to, there is no exposure of the data externally outside of the server. And from a security point of view, a data security point of view, now that we're all worried about GDPR and everything else, that's a really big deal. So IT departments are going to be a lot more comfortable with the new version of Q&A. So let's talk about functionality. Now, instead of previously, Q&A was a suite of tools. So you had Q&A Excel, Q&A Executive, Q&A Alert, Q&A Budget Manager. Now Q&A is one product. all of the functionality of Q&A 11 is just within the Excel add-in. And you'll see that we've incorporated a lot of functionality from those other modules into the new Q&A add-in. In Q&A 10, you've always been able to do drill downs, okay? But the negative of them was that when you did a drill down, it would pop up as a separate box in your workbook. So that's actually been changed by Infor, so that now when you drill down on your data, it populates a separate worksheet in the workbook. This means when you distribute the workbook to other users who perhaps don't have Q&A, they can still see the results of the drill down. So that's one fundamental change. We also have two new pieces of functionality for Excel, which are expand and breakout. Now, if you've ever used or seen Executive, what this means is you are able to interrogate the data in your spreadsheet in new ways. And we'll look at that, and it's much easier to see exactly what that functionality does. But expand allows you to, from an attribute, look at the data within a workbook, and breakout allows you to create separate sheets based on other criteria. This also means that we have a fundamental shift in the way that you think about reports in Q&A, which is more in line with the previous Executive. Because of the new functionality that Q&A 11 has, when you're looking to design a report, you're approaching it in a different manner. Previously, Q&A Excel would have to extract all of the underlying information that you wanted to summarize up for a report pack. Now we do it the other way round. So when you're writing a report, you would start with a very simple report, and we'll look at that when I show you the product, and actually use the tools like drill down and expand and breakout to break it into its details. And you're able to then send that whole report pack of data to users who don't have Q&A. To facilitate that, we have something called Drill Path Manager. Now, what that does is if you've taken a simple report and you've used these tools like expand, breakout, drill down, using Drill Path Manager, you can save what you've done to the original report, give it a name, and then the next month when you come to open that report pack, you press the play button and the data is refreshed with the new data based on the way you manipulated it the month before. We'll have a look at that in action and you can see how that works. But that's really a massive time saving. So instead of having to look at your report and then break it out by department and then maybe drill down to the transactions every single month, you just press the play button in Drill Path Manager and it does it for you. All of this new functionality, Drill Path Manager, thinking about your reports in a different way, is really allowing you to maximize your report efficiency. Because the call on the data back to the database would be smaller, it means that you are able to write much more efficient reports. Another bonus of Q&A 11 is that automatic recalculate is enabled as standard, because that has historically been a big pain. The fact that you had to have manual recalculate switched on for Q&A in the past. Now you can have automatic recalculate as standard, and when you're writing reports that maybe incorporate data or Excel functions or data from other systems, you don't have to keep turning off, logging out of Q&A, recalculate and going back in. It's all there as automatic. The other big change is, whereas previously there was a module called Q&A Alert, the alert functionality is now embedded within Q&A 11. No extra cost, it's in there as standard, you don't have to buy a separate module, and we'll have a look at what that can do for you. I'm just going to show you a bit about the look and feel, and then we'll have a look at the product. Okay, so really between 10 and 11, you've got very much the same functionality. Okay, differences are version 11, no Q&A executive, no budget management. Okay, everything else you'll see is there. It may look and feel a little different, it may behave slightly differently, but the other basic functionality is all in Q&A 11. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to take us over to our demo box so we can have a look. So we're currently in Excel. Okay, and you can see at the top here, we've got a standard Q&A login. You can see the icons look fairly similar to what we're used to seeing. If I log in now, it's going to pop up a little login box for me. It's probably been asleep, so it's going to think about it for a bit. But everything you see will look fairly familiar to what we've been used to having. It's maybe slightly more modern icons, but everything else we have here we can see is familiar. So we've still got our summary links, our summary reports, detail reports, reference links, our calculate options, data send. This section here is where we have our new functionality. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create a simple summary report, and then we're going to look at how the new functionality allows you to manipulate the data. So let's create a summary report. We're looking at Sun Systems 4. We're going to look at the database again from the spreadsheet, just like you do at the moment. We're going to look at the ledger, and you'll see in here we've got all the same tables you're used to looking at, maybe laid out slightly differently, but chart of accounts, names and addresses, etc. We're going to look at the ledger. I'm going to pick my account code up from the workbook. And for the period, we have all the same period choices that you're used to seeing in Q&A. I'm going to choose balance. We've got period offsets, which you'll be familiar with, and also current period overrides, all the same as before. Now, this selection list here does look quite different. And we're able to do some neat things like mark items as favourites, sort them, put them into folders. But fundamentally, it's the same as we're used to seeing before. Wherever you see the little arrow, it takes you to a linked piece of data. I'm going to do a report. I want to see what my creditor balances are by account and period. Now, previously, I may have output the account code and the period and the amount. This time, I'm not going to do that. So I'm just going to output the account code and the base amount. Now, on the report style tab, you'll see, again, this looks just like Q&A 10. It's exactly the same as before. We have report designer, which does work slightly differently, but still allows you to do the same fundamental basics. And on the options, we have the choice whether to allow this report to drill down or not. Okay, by default, it's ticked, so we're going to leave it that way. So there we go. So I've got my simple list of accounts with their base amounts. But I want to see that information by period. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight those values, and I'm going to use the expand functionality and expand by period. Now what this is doing, it's saying for each account, it's going to give me a row by period with a value for that period. And it's going to give me some control on the left-hand side, so worksheet controls, where I can collapse or expand the actual rows themselves. So if I collapse them all, it looks very much like our original report, but I could choose, for example, to expand first account and have a look at what those values are by period. Or I can expand them all, or I can collapse them all. Now, when I expand, I can expand by any number of attributes. So I've chosen just period to keep it simple, but we could have done period and department, we could have done entity, we could have done anything you like. We could do it by currency and period, for example. So you can see that this is taking a very simple report here and giving us much more useful information using the tool expand. Now, if we go back to our original report, and this time what we do is we say we want to do a breakout. And this time I'm going to do it by period again. What this will do is this will actually create, and it's going to warn us that we're going to get 16 new sheets. Are we sure? Because obviously you may break out an attribute that creates hundreds of sheets. So it's giving you the chance to say no. This is going to create a sheet for each of those periods. So what we'll get is the original report, exactly the same report, but each sheet is for a separate period. Now, if you think that these breakouts, we could have broken out by department, for example, or we could have broken out by entity, or perhaps by currency. So if this report were a P&L, let's say, we could have a departmental P&L just by pressing a button using breakout, instead of having to define each individual sheet as a separate P&L for that department, and then have a summary sheet at the end of the workbook. We've let the Q&A 11 tool do that for us, okay? So that's a lot quicker than having to do it the way we would have had to do it in Q&A 10. So if we head back to our original sheet, And this time I'm going to interrogate one piece of data. Now, what you'll notice is here is our summary report definition in the first cell that my cursor was in when we output it. But in each of these, you'll see a new formula that you won't be familiar with, which allows us to drill down. If we'd have said no to drill down, that formula would not be there. Okay. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do a summary drill. And this time I'm going to say, okay, well, you know what? I just want to see the figures by period for that one account, 64001. So off we go. And here it is. It's given us our workbook. It's saying, okay, for that account, these are the figures by period. It sums back to our original figure. Okay. Usefully, if I hover over the comment in the top, it tells me what I was looking at. So I was looking at products and systems 4, database dem, table the ledger, which ledger code it is, it's the actuals ledger, which account code range, 64001, and which period balance. So in other words, balance of the account. So I can always see, even though it may not be obvious when I look at it, exactly what the data is. Also, one of the other things I can do is I can rename the worksheet. Okay, and it will still work in our drill path manager. So I could say 64001 by period, for example. Okay. Now the other thing we can do, if we just head back to our original report there, let's say I wanted to see the transactions that made up that amount. Maybe I was investigating some discrepancy. I can do transaction drill. Now this was available in 10. But you'll see that it actually outputs the results into the workbook itself rather than into a pop-up. And because it's the transaction drill, I'm going to want some more information other than just period. So let's output the period. Let's have some more journal information like the transaction date, the journal number, the journal line number, transaction reference, description. Okay. Now, if I want to sort, I could sort by journal number. Excuse me. So now we're going to sort by journal number. And in a new worksheet in my workbook, I've now got all of the transactions that make up my original amount. And I could have output whatever data I like. And it's in journal number order. Obviously, I can control what order that comes out in. And again, just like the previous drill down, we have a comment to tell us exactly what we're looking at. And I can change the name of this. Oops. So 0. Okay. So now what we've done is from a really very simple report, what we've actually done is built up a workbook that's got lots of detailed information in it that I could now send to somebody who doesn't have Q&A. Okay, but the key point I want to illustrate is that it requires a small mindset change because we're looking from at the top level of the data and then we're using the tool to drill down into the information that our users might require. Now, if I then save this report, okay, what I can do is also look at the drill path manager, which is what we were talking about before. So what our drill path manager does is it shows graphically the tabs that I've got in my workbook. And fundamentally underneath, it understands how they were produced. So let's have a look. On this sheet here, I've got my expand, that's what this icon means. And you'll see it matches the icons on the toolbar. This expand by period. I've got my breakout by period. So it acts like a kind of menu, if you like. I've also got my drill down by period, and you'll see I changed the sheet name here and it's reflected in Drill Path Manager. And then I've got my transactions for that one account. I can use this button here, Save, to give this drill path a name, okay, and a description. Okay, and once I've saved it, it now appears in the bottom section of Drill Path Manager. Now, when I save this workbook, what that means is this drill path is saved within it. If I go to open this workbook next month, when of course we've had another period's worth of transactions, what I can do is I can, instead of having to go through the process of going, okay, I want to drill down, I want to break out, I want to look at the transactions, I can just come straight to my Drill Path Manager, press play, and it will re-extract all the data, but including all the new transactions. Okay. So using the new tools that we've got, our enhanced drill down, our breakout, our expand, and our drill path manager, you can actually manipulate the data much more quickly, much more easily, and with a lot less hassle than you could do before, which was always quite a big advantage of Q&A Executive. And you've now got this functionality in Excel. You've still got all the other functionality as well too. Now, another thing I can do is I can schedule this workbook. So what that means is we're now looking at alert functionality. I can say, what do I want to do with it? Well, I want to extract the workbook and I want to save it as a PDF, for example. Oops. Oops, if I click in there first. And then what I can do is I can say, do I want to output the whole workbook or do I just want to output particular sheets? Maybe that different people need to see different departments, for example. I'm going to output the whole workbook. You can see the other things we can do is we could print it, so we could send it to a printer. We can save it as a separate workbook. We can email it as either a zipped attachment, an Excel workbook, or a PDF. Okay. So once we've done that, we need to give it a task name. So we will say creditors. And we can allow other users or not to schedule, view, and edit this task. And we just save it. Then when we look at Alert Scheduler, what we'll see is our workbook, and we can actually schedule that to a calendar. So I can say that I want this to run every monthly on day 5 of the month or the first Sunday, and only certain months. Perhaps there's no point doing it in August because no one's around. I can say that I want it to start on the 23rd of April and I want it to go for 6 months. And then I can assign a time slot. Okay. And then that task will then automatically run in the background and produce whatever it is we've decided that we want to produce. And this is really important when you think that you're going to be running your reports on the server. So maybe you want to stagger running large reports to fully utilize the servers when no one else is on them, for example. Okay, so we've had a quick look at what the new functionality is in Q&A 11. The other thing I want to show you is also exactly what the user manager web version looks like. So we're in Chrome here at the moment. You would always log in just as you used to do on Q&A 10 as system. Okay, so it's just like the old setup version. So I'm going to log in. The first thing you see on the home page is what version of the add-in are you using? Okay, and do I want to download an updated version? So if you go to log into, let's say your IT department have applied a patch and you log into Excel, so not this, but Excel, it will actually prompt you to download a new version of the add-in. Okay, and you can download the new version of the add-in from here. User Manager allows you to do some very simple things. So let's have a look at good old favourite PK1. Okay, and then what we can do is we can have a look there and we could add a user. We could delete the user. When we add a user, we can only assign them to an existing profile, and you can see everyone's assigned to guest here. We could clear a user if we've got users locked in, maybe they crashed out. We could clear all users. We could reset somebody's password or reset our own password, or we can assign a user to a new profile. Any other administrative tasks like access to certain functions or permissions or creating new profiles need to be done on the actual server by whoever is the administrator. But this does allow you to do some basic functionality from the client itself. And we can just log out. One last thing I just wanted to show you is how you would add in the add-in to Excel. And we do that using something called data link checker. Plugin checker, sorry. Okay, so it's a little module here, plugin checker, and I either add it in or I remove it. And this is telling you where this data link server is, okay? And you can test you've got access to it. We might use that on support if there's any problems, but you can add it to Excel or you remove it, and it's as simple as that. Now what we're going to do is we're just going to have a look back at our slides now that we've seen the product. Okay. When it comes to migrating, we have some tools that allow you to migrate your reports. Okay. Now there are quite a lot of caveats, just like there were on Q&A 10 if you upgraded from older versions or upgraded your products from Sun 4 to Sun 6, for example. So you can upgrade your users using the tools. You can upgrade any Q&A 10 reports that are saved as internal definitions. Okay. You can upgrade any data sends that are saved as internal definitions, assuming you're staying on the same version of Sun. But we would recommend, as we've been talking about previously during today's session, that you really have a good think about your report and decide, whilst you can obviously take the reports from Q&A 10 as they are, it's really a good opportunity to think, well, is that really appropriate? Now that I've got this extra functionality in Q&A 11, is that the right way to have written my report? Possibly not. I would say in a large number of cases, it isn't. There are some things that can't be migrated. So if you are already a Q&A alert user, you can't migrate your existing alerts. And that's due to the fact that the product's been rewritten. Macros will need to be rewritten in the new product. So if you use macros in Q&A 10 to have buttons on your workbooks or refresh stuff, they would need to be rewritten. And non-standard formulae cannot be migrated. So, for example, things like, I know some people like to take the Q&A formula in 10 and embed them into something else, maybe some conditions, that will not be migrated. But that's the same on Q&A 10 too, so that wouldn't be any different. The other thing that wouldn't be migrated is from Q&A 10, anything you've got in Report Designer. So if you have report designers to format your reports, they would not be migrated to Q&A 11. You'd have to recreate those. Now, the big advantage is what you can do is you can run Q&A 10 and 11 concurrently, either in the same version of Excel, or if, let's say, the whole point of going to 11 is to have Excel 64-bit, obviously you'd need 2 copies of Excel, one 64-bit, one 32-bit, but there's no problem with both being on the same PC. They do run concurrently. What that means is, and also Info have been quite generous in allowing the licensing to overlap for quite some time, so it does give you the time to leisurely migrate or redesign your reports. You're not going to have a hard switch over that says, okay, we've stopped using Q&A 10 and now we're using Q&A 11. So you can actually take some time about it and think about how you might want to redesign those reports. So why would you want to upgrade? The first thing is, it's the way ahead. And what we mean by that is you are future-proofing your reporting. Currently, Q&A 10 imposes particularly a lot of technological restrictions on upgrading. So things like not being able to use the later versions of Office 365, not being able to use Excel 2019, not being able to use 64-bit Excel. There are some other issues around versions of Windows. So by moving to Q&A 11, it's actually future-proofing your product. New technologies are going to demand it. Newer Excel versions, new operating systems, Sun Systems versions. As we've said, new versions of Sun Systems will only work with Q&A 11. So there is going to be a point at which you will have no choice. And it also means, however, that you can benefit from running on a product that's been designed for 64-bit client-server architecture. So it's not just a rehash of the old product. It's not just a kind of fudge it and make it fit to the new technology. It's actually been designed for this purpose. So that means that it's going to be designed in the most efficient way that it can be done. Big advantage, you can run Q&A 10 and 11 together concurrently on the same machine, okay, with the provisos of the software versions we mentioned before, which allows you a nice long period of time to move to the new version. This is the big key one. You can take advantage of the new features and look again at your reporting requirements. Okay, so you can actually have the time to look and see, can I simplify? Can I distribute them better using alert? Can I actually present my information in a better way, in a more intuitive way? Can I actually...
طبعا زي ما احنا شايفين التاريخ قديم حبتين 3 2008 لان النسخه ديت باك اب مش لايف طبعا، دي نسخه تدريبيه مش اكتر من كده. طبعا زي ما احنا شايفين الشاشه دي هي بتقول لي انت عاوز ايه، غالبا بروح داخل على الليدجر اكونت اللي ايه. كل حاجه يا جماعه في البرنامج ده بيقول لك الاحرف بتاعته، البرنامج بتعمل بالحروف، الاحرف بتاعته والترجمه بتاعتها دي ال ايه ليدجر اكونت، او اذا كنت انا عايز اعمل اي حاجه ثانيه كتبت ال ايه هروح مدخلني يقول لي عايز الداتابيز ايه. تمام. طبعا البرنامج كان فيه داتابيز لايف الشغل بتاعتنا وفي تريننج عشان الناس اللي مش عارفه، بروح داخل على الداتابيز بتاعتنا يديني الشاشه الرئيسيه بقى للبرنامج بقى بالاسطنه زي ما احنا شايفين من الشمال كده الانتريز بتاعتنا دي اهم حاجه. بعد كده الريبورتات اذا كان في صيانه او في حاجه زي كده، دي الاقسام بتاعتنا زي ما احنا شايفين قدامنا كده على الشاشه. احنا بالنسبه لنا كمحاسبين يا اما ان انا بدخل قيد، يا اما ان انا اخش اعدل على قيد معين استدعيه واشوفه واعدل فيه لو في حاجه عايز اعدل، او الالوكيشن بتاعتنا دي اللي هي التوزيعات. تمام. ودي بيعملها الشيف اكونت عنده توزيعات معينه بنبدا نعملها زي شؤون الموظفين والكلام ده كله هنحكيها بعدين. بعد كده بنعمل توزيعات على الاقسام بتاع الكوندا بتاع الفندق بتاعنا. طبعا انا بروح داخل عندي هنا اروح هعمل قيد ولا هعمل ايه، بيبدا يقول لي انا هعمل ايه. طبعا عشان انا اخترت التوزيعات طبعا محتاج ان يكون عندي داتابيز، فانا ما عنديش داتابيز اساسا. تمام. لان زمان النسخه دي باك اب، فهخرج طبعا من البرنامج وهرجع من اول وجديد من اول الدخول تاني. طبعا احنا عارفين هروح داخل على سطح المكتب الشورت كود بتاعنا، شورت كات، اروح دايس عليه دبل كليك اروح فاتح معايا اليوزر نيم والباسورد بتاعنا، واروح داخل زي ما احنا دخلنا اول مره الليدجر اكونت بتاعتنا اللي يروح جاي مدخلني على البرنامج، اختار الداتابيز بتاعتي وانتر هيروح مدخلني عليها. سهل جدا يا جماعه على فكره، هو محتاج بس بالتكرار انت بتتعلم. تمام. ودي كان في اكاديميه كنا احنا عاملينها كنا بندرب الناس عليها. تمام. هنا دخلت ان انا اعمل قيد، هيقول لي نوع القيد بتاعك ايه. في زي ما احنا شايفين كده هنلاقي فيه في سهم، كل ما الاقي سهم صغير ده يا جماعه اعرف انه في اوبشن بيحصل هنا، في اوبشن في حاجات معينه يعني. طبعا انا هعمل هنا ستارت، وستارت اختصار اول حرف عندنا اللي هي الاس، طبعا بروح حاطط اس يقول لي ستارت، ويبدا يقول لي انت عاوز ايه في القيد ده، اختار نوع القيد بتاعك ده، التايب بتاعه نوع ايه. بروح داخل زي ما احنا شايفين كده في سهم صغير كده في حاجات موجوده. ايه بقى القيد زي ما احنا شايفين كده، القيود يا اما قيد بنكي يا اما قيد كاش ريسيت او لاخره. بختار اي حاجه انا عاوزها طبعا، ولكن كاش مثلا. بيبدا يدخلني على الصفحه بتاعه القيد نفسه بقى. انا هعمل القيد ازاي، هكتب فيه ايه، الريفرنس بتاعنا بدايه كلمه انا بكتبها وببقى عارف ان القيد ده بتاع ايه. تمام. بروح داخل معايا التاريخ، احنا طبعا التاريخ زي ما انتم شايفين كان اكتوبر 2007. تمام. بروح داخل على طب هو بعد كده بيقول لي كان في اكتوبر 2007، بقول له مثلا وليكن 1/10/10 ايا كان يعني. تمام. بروح داخل عند الريفرنس بتاعنا كاش ريسيت، اوكي كاش ريسيت. بروح داخل عنده ويبدا يقول لي ايه الاكونت كود. دي بقى شجره الحسابات بتاعتنا اللي هي متسطبه موجوده قبل كده. تمام. عشان اختار الحساب اللي انا هرمي عليه ديبت وهرمي عليه كريدت. طبعا انا مش في دماغي كود معين، فانا هختار اي حاجه. احنا بندي الفكره بتاعتنا، هختار حساب معين وهعمله مره ديبت وحساب تاني هعمله مره كريدت وليكن يعني. المهم انا في القيود طبعا ببقى مجهزها قبل كده. الحركه بتاعتي بختار قيد معين اروح اعمله ديبت يقول لي الاماونت بتاعه كام. تمام. اروح حاطط الاماونت بتاعي. تمام. مبلغ قد يكون مثلا اي 150 جنيه مثلا ولا اي حاجه، والاقي في اللي قدام مني دي ده ديبت ولا كريدت، حرف الدي ديبت وحرف السي يعني كريدت. تمام. دي النقط يا جماعه وانت بتعمل ادخال القيد بتاعك لازم تكون واخد بالك جدا من ايدك رايحه فين، لان يعني حساس جدا. طبعا احنا بنخش تاني ونعدل ونعمل هوريكم طبعا. تمام. انا اخترت مثلا المبلغ وبعدين اخش تاني حساب تاني لو انا عاوزه. طبعا شجره الحسابات موجوده، اروح داخل على الشجره بتاعتنا. تمام. واختار الحساب التاني. تمام. وطبعا انا مش فاكر طبعا الاكواد بتاعتنا ايه ولا الحاجه دي يعني ايه، خدت بالك. فانا هبدا ادور على حساب معين ممكن اعمل له ادخال او حاجه كده. ببدا اعمل عمليه بحث بشجره الحسابات بتاعتي. تمام. وطبعا دي موجوده، ولو في حساب ما دخلش ده اللي بالاي تي مع مدير المال او مدير الحسابات بيبدا يعمل له ادخال، لان دي توزيع معينه دي بعيده عننا خالص، دي طريقه معينه عشان نسمع فيها. وغالبا احنا كنا عملنا ادخال مره في حسابه وسمع تاني غلط، وكانت قصه كده طبعا عشان كده احنا ما بنتدخلش فيها. والبرنامج ده حساس جدا يا جماعه في التعامل. تمام، يعني حاول قدر امكانك، انا ايدي رايحه عارف انا بعمل ايه. تمام، وبرمي القيد بتاعي بالظبط. وغالبا احنا بنعمل القيود هولد، يعني نخليها ما تعملش بوست، ما تروحش على شجره الحسابات تسمع في الارصده يعني. تمام، بنعملها هولد عشان بعد كده تتشيك عليها، محتمل اعدل في حاجه او حاجه زي كده، في الاخر بروح اعمل لهم بوست يروح يسمعوا في الحسابات وياخدوا الريبورت بعد كده للنهايه. وبرده معلومه كمان، ان في مشكله في الصن ده، كان في برنامج كمان معاه اسمه الفيجن، ده عامل زي الاكسل كده بس بياخد البيانات بتاعته من الصن عشان يطلع لي الريبورت اللي هو الاجمالي البي طبعا. تمام، فده برضه ليه قدام شويه كده، هو مش عندي للاسف، بس احنا بناخد الفكره بتاعته. هو مش اكتر من انه بيديني الاكواد بتاعتنا دي كلها، الديبت والكريدت وايه اللي حصل عليها والرصيد بتاعه نهايه الفتره نهايه الشهر مثلا. يعني احنا بنقفل على فكره يا جماعه في الفنادق بشكل عام، بنقفل البي ان ال بتاعتنا كل شهر. يعني ممكن نقول ان احنا بنعمل ميزانيه كل شهر، هي مش ميزانيه طبعا، ما بطلعش ميزانيه، بس انا بقول لك كأن احنا بنعمل ميزانيه كل شهر. اخترت الحساب التاني ايا كان هو طبعا، واحط المبلغ. تمام، هنلاقي الصن بيديني فوق هنا كده جنب المبلغ الاولاني، بيقول لي انت اللي محتاجه دلوقتي زي ما احنا شايفين كده، المبلغ اللي رماهولي الاول. تمام، اللي انا رميته الاول الكريدت، يبقى انا محتاج الديبت. يعني هو بيرشدني لما اقول له دي دلوقتي بقى صفر زي ما احنا شايفين فوق في اليمين كده. تمام، يعني انا كده القيد بتاعي اوريدي موزون يمين وشمال، مش محتاجين ان احنا نعمل حاجه. طب لو انا عملت حاجه غلط هيقول لي بقى، هيروح قايل لي انت خدت حساب تاني غلط، وروح مزودها ويقول لي انت لسه فاضل الدي والمبلغ مثلا بقى اعلى وليكن مثلا. تمام، طبعا زي ما احنا شايفين الاكشن دي، القائمه ديت هي اللي بتقول لي الخطوه بتاعتي اللي جايه ايه والكلام ده كله. يعني انا عملت قيد دلوقتي خلاص، هل اعمل له بوست، هل اعمل له هولد، هل هعمل له فيو عشان اشوفه تاني، الكلام ده كله. طبعا بروح طالع واروح داخل على القائمه عشان اشوف انا عاوز اعمل ايه في القيد بتاعي ده على حسب بقى. عندنا قيد واحد هشوف وضعه ايه. تمام يا جماعه، التعامل قائمه الاكشن اللي قدام زي ما احنا شفناها كده، دي بتديني كل خطوه بهدوء كده، وباخد اول حرف منها عشان يبدا يشتغل معايا زي ما احنا شايفين. طبعا انا شفت قائمه الهولد، انا عندي 3 جيفات معمولين اهم. انا لسه عامل جي في من شويه صغيرين. شفنا طبعا اول حاجه انا علمت لكم بالماوس كده، خد بالك من رقم القيد. رقم القيد اللي احنا عملناه، القيد بتاعنا ده كان الرقم بتاعه تمام 3400 اللي هو 93. بروح اعمل له يعمل لي عرض ليه دلوقتي. انا دخلت عليه كده اعمل لي عرض لده ل 3493 قائمه اكشن، اقول له فيو وريني القيد بتاعي ده. وطبعا لو دوست في على طول من غير ما افتح قائمه اكشن هتحفظ انت الحاجات دي كلها. بدل ما تفتح القائمه وتدور وتعمل، خلاص بقى فيها يروح عامل لك فيو، يروح عارض لك القيد. كان ديبت بقد كده على حساب كذا، كريدت قد كده على حساب كذا، مش عارف ايه. امين يا جماعه عشان اشوف. ممكن نروح داخل على القيد نفسه، اخش لو انا عايز اعدل الحساب، يعني انا حطيت حساب غلط او حاجه زي كده. تمام، اروح داخل على القيد نفسه، هشوفها دلوقتي. انا اروح داخل اقول له امين يا سيدي، هات لي كده الدنيا اللي عندك جوه ايه في القيد ده كده. يمكن انا عايز اعدل رقم، عايز اعدل مبلغ، حطيت مبلغ غلط. تمام، اروح داخل عليه، يبدا يفتح لي القيد خطوه خطوه، كاني لسه بعمل قيد من اول وجديد تاني، بس هو موجود. يعني كاني لسه بعمله عشان اخش اعدل زي ما احنا شايفين كده. اخش دي، لا انا مش عاوز اعدل ريفرنس، التاريخ، المبلغ، الحساب طبعا. اروح داخل خطوه خطوه على كل حاجه. لو انا عايز اعدل رقم حساب مثلا هو من ده لده او الكلام ده كله، اكتشفت ان انا عملت حساب اللي تحت رقم المفروض اخد اللي فوق منه على طول، او ايا كان التعديل اللي عايز اعمله. تمام، اخلص طبعا التعديل بتاعي او الخيط بتاعي. تمام، واروح رايح بعد كده اقول له خليك مثلا هولد، اعمل له بوست مع بقيه الجيفات كلها مره واحده مثلا يعني. تمام، البرنامج لذيذ يا جماعه، يعني مش صعب. وطبعا لما انت تخش وتشتغل عليه بايدك هتلاقيك ما شاء الله هتهضمه بسرعه، زي ما بنقول عليه زي ما احنا في شغلنا بنقول لك هتهضم البرنامج بسرعه. وبس كل هو محتاج عليه انك تتعامل عليه واحده واحده، يعني ما تجريش. يعني محتاج بس ان انا اتعامل بهدوء عليه، وبعدين ايدي تبدا تعرف